Let me entertain you. Graham. Mate, I'm sorry. I know I look more like Andy Williams than Robbie Williams.
I couldn't remember the next line. Sorry, I couldn't join you in that amazing introduction. Sorry.
Nobody needs more. You have played a blinder in the lead up to this one because there's something very special. Why don't you take it away and let people know what they're in for here?
Well, it was a very brave thing to do, but I wanted to bring in a special guest today, somebody who has experienced a lot of virtual, won't spoil it too much, but a virtual experience where he's been on the receiving end of lots of virtual learning, shall we say, and I just wanted to ask his opinion on it, really.
He knows what works. I've always wanted to say this, Graham, but roll VT.
This is my son, Connell. Hello, Connell.
Hi.
How are you doing? He's got a great school and they've been doing some fantastic classes online. But I thought it might be interesting just to ask Connell what makes for a really good class versus one that's a bit more boring and dull.
Well, it's normally when they don't allow any interacting with the class, and it's just them not teaching but talking the whole time, and probably barely asking any questions. Because if they're just hearing the same voice talking for 10 minutes at them, they probably get quite bored of it, and it's hard to listen if you've been hearing the same voice.
So Graham, let's be honest, Connell doesn't want to be bored. He wants to be engaged and to be kept engaged right throughout the whole thing. I mean, what are your views on that? How we can use that in the corporate world?
Yeah, well, I think if we were coaching and training people on this stuff, we'd be or working with them on a live pitch, we'd be telling them, think about changing the pace in which you're talking. A bit like if we were writing the proposal, changing the length of the sentences just to make it a bit more interesting, less sort of monotonous, isn't it? If it doesn't feel like it's very set piece. So changing the volume, pausing, things like that, just to try and make it a bit more interesting.
It just breaks up the patterns in the brain and makes people, it doesn't put them into a trance. And I think that's an interesting thing. If I was to talk about the content right from the beginning as well, I mean, our brains are looking for any reason not to pay attention to what is being said to us. And I think it's Kendall Haven, the American story expert, who talks about seeing communication almost as an economic transaction, where you want people to pay attention, literally pay with their scarce resource of attention right at the beginning and keep paying with it. And the reason that they will pay attention is if what is said to them right from the kickoff is incredibly relevant, or it's new, or it's surprising. And how many times have we had to tell people, don't start with the thank you very much for inviting us here this afternoon. It's the fluff, it's the bit that people don't need to hear. Just cut to the chase.
But the bits in the middle, you don't want them to go to sleep either. So you've almost got to have the little grabbers, as you said, all the way through.
That's the one. Let's go back to our expert and see what he has to say next, eh?
Do your teachers use PowerPoint for some of the lessons?
Yes, they do. They use PowerPoint where they share the screen so we can all see the PowerPoint they've created. Yeah. And some of them have questions on them. Like if it was maths, it'd be like, what's 20 times 50 or something?
Well, that's easy.
Yeah, I know, but...
and okay, so sometimes they're using PowerPoint. Does that get a bit boring if it's all PowerPoint?
Yeah, it is. So sometimes they instead of sharing a PowerPoint, they share like a special video. It's not of them, but just like an online video. Yeah. So they share it on the screen, and then it looks like we're watching a video on the computer.
Okay. And why does that make it more interesting?
Because instead of hearing like the same voice like for the whole lesson, you hear like a different voice, and sometimes it can be more interesting.
So Graham, he loves it. Connell loves it when the material's mixed up. I mean, there are different mediums almost for him to be looking at. So tell me about some of the stuff that you do, because I mean that's very much your sweet spot.
Yeah, I think that the more we've been playing with the pitching in the virtual world as well, the more you realise that people want to see the people. So it's great to see each other. So have some bits where it's just the people talking, but if it's a longer meeting, a longer pitch, then it's more interesting and more engaging to then maybe change the media. during it. So perhaps you've got a clip of something, of a client testimony or an animation showing your solution or an idea. You know, flick to that for a bit, then flick back to you talking. Just vary it up like that, a bit like, you know, how you change the pace when you're delivering delivering the script. So change it up like that, definitely.
I remember there was a client of mine up in Scotland many years ago who they actually used a game version, which you could do online as well. They created a version of Snakes and Ladders for this particular, it was all about risk assessment. And so there were the risks were going down the snakes, and the ladders were things that you should do. But there were also little question marks, almost chance cards on the board. And those were the personal things. So, I mean, if you landed on one of those, you turned a card over and it was things like, what did you want to be when you were 10 years old? Actually, the biggest laugh came when somebody was said, I wanted to be an accountant, and everyone turned and went, what?
That's not true, surely.
It wasn't true. I think it was actually, but it's interesting. So they learned about the business, but they learned about each other as human beings as well. So as long as it's appropriate, because I've seen people wanting to use materials which aren't appropriate and, you know, just would have been contradictory to what you were trying to sell. But if it is appropriate, if it keeps engagement, if it makes people want to sort of keep paying that attention, do it. Let's go back to our expert. What's he got to say next?
It's good when they're saying something that they probably really haven't planned on saying at the start, because it makes everything much more interesting. So it's all more like a one-on-one like conversation, like you don't really notice anyone else like actually listening to the same.
It's like they're talking to you versus they're reading out something to a big load of people.
Yeah.
So unsurprisingly, our expert wants to feel that there's an actual human being on the other side. He doesn't want a robot, he wants a human. Come on, Graham, what are we going to do about that?
Well, funnily enough, the more you rehearse and practice something, the more natural it sounds. So unfortunately, there's no real silver bullet. If you've got to go back and practice it time and time again on your own, and then with a dummy audience just to practice it. So, you know, practice makes perfection, but it also makes permanent.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, when I was an actor, we'd rehearse anywhere from between 4 weeks and 12 weeks, even with places like with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and basically getting through that burn where it stops feeling like words on a page to starting feeling like your words. And, you know, somebody could poke you in the head in the middle of the night and say, do that scene, and you would, because it was just there.
The more you do these things, the more they just become second nature. So the natural side of it comes out. If you've rehearsed other pitches in the past, you've got a backlog of stories, and somebody will mention something from the client, and you'll think, you know, you'll just be able to recall a story of where you've helped another client in the past, and suddenly it's completely conversational, but it actually, it's down there, it's in the brain somewhere because you've practiced it in the past.
And I agree with you about the stories very much. I think it's an interesting one that we can fall into the trap of preparing enough for the presentation rather than almost creating that bank of stories that you think, oh, they've just said that, maybe I'll drop this story in here now, which is a useful thing. So over preparing your content and not feeling you have to use all of it. It's there as it's a safety net just to add richness to the presentation. Can we have a round of applause for Connell Ablett? What a man.
His school is fantastic, by the way. They're doing a great job.
All right, stop selling, Graham. You're not allowed to stop selling. Thank you, everyone. We've really enjoyed this one. Once again, any questions down below. And, well, see you next week, Graham.
See you next time. Looking forward to it already.
Take care, mate. Bye, everyone.
Bye.